Sabotage against Hamilton in the Barcelona Grand Prix qualifying. Stay until the end to hear Hamilton's powerful radio response after finding out about the incident. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. During the early hours after the race, the media center buzzed with confusion, cameras scanning every angle of Hamilton's pit entry, analysts dissecting milliseconds, telemetry data flashing across screens like hieroglyphs. But it wasn't until Hamilton stepped in front of the cameras that the weekend's narrative took an entirely new direction. Visibly agitated, his jaw clenched with a barely restrained fire that had defined his greatest battles, Hamilton didn't mince his words. "I was called in at the last second," he said, voice steady but loaded with intent. "There was a message on my radio, garbled, static, then another voice, not from my engineer, saying box now, box now. I followed instructions, I trusted the system, but it wasn't my usual call. I don't know who gave that order." The press room went silent. The air practically crystallized around his words. Social media detonated. Was this a case of technical interference? A communications glitch? Or something far more calculated? The FIA was immediately pressed to respond. They issued a brief statement claiming they were reviewing all relevant radio communications and investigating any potential anomalies, but speculation had already spilled into overdrive. Conspiracy theories surged through every F1 subreddit, TikTok feed, and fan forum, suggestions ranging from a rogue signal interruption to sabotage from a rival team to even more absurd allegations implicating AI algorithms misrouting pit instructions. Some claimed Mercedes' internal systems had been hacked. Others believed it was internal politics at play, tensions between Hamilton's crew and new additions to the garage, whispers of dissatisfaction over recent development paths and diverging philosophies about tire strategies and setup calls. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. Hamilton, when asked again, simply shook his head. "All I'll say is, something didn't feel right. I've raced long enough to know when something's off, and today it was off." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. But he didn't have to. The seeds of suspicion had already been sown. The paddock turned into a theater of whispers. Engineers from rival teams swapped glances in hospitality lounges. Drivers texted cryptic emojis back and forth. One anonymous team principal, when asked off record, said only, "That radio clip doesn't sound like standard protocol. There's a pattern here. Go look at the last few times Hamilton's been mysteriously called in at critical moments." Meanwhile, Toto Wolff was unusually subdued. His normal fire was replaced by a kind of guarded calm that only made reporters more suspicious. "We'll analyze the data," he said at the post-race press conference, his eyes shadowed with fatigue and something else, calculation. "We've identified an irregularity in the comms pathway. We're not ready to say more, but yes, it's unusual. And yes, it's being taken seriously." George Russell, for his part, looked like he'd seen a ghost when asked about his own radio feed during the VSC. It was clean. No issues. But that doesn't mean anything. Comms can be isolated. As if the controversy wasn't already volatile, leaked audio from another team emerged late Sunday night. An unverified clip circulated online appeared to capture a strange crossfeed of radio noise bleeding into the Alpine garage during the VSC, a ghostly, unintelligible string of commands ending with a distorted box now, box now. The voices didn't match any engineer on record. The clip was quickly pulled from official sources, but not before fans had ripped it into 1,000 edits and translations. Some swore it sounded like a synthesized voice, emotionless, clipped, like an automated system run amok. By Monday morning, Radiogate was trending across multiple countries, with fan petitions demanding a full FIA audit of all team radio systems and telemetry security protocols. What was supposed to be a quiet return to form for Hamilton had turned into something far bigger, a powder keg of mistrust, technological paranoia, and political intrigue. His P4 had been stripped, his reputation drawn into shadow once again, and yet his demeanor suggested something different. Not defeat, not outrage, but resolve. A sense that he had crossed into a new phase. That he no longer just raced to win, but to expose. To challenge not just drivers, but the machinery behind the sport itself. That behind the gloves and helmet was now a man who wasn't going to just play the game, but start asking who designed it. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. By Tuesday, Mercedes confirmed they had launched an internal investigation involving external cybersecurity consultants. Rumors hinted that the anomaly may not have originated from within their own system. Whispers pointed toward an obscure supplier used by multiple teams for radio encryption, a company recently acquired in a quiet merger by a tech conglomerate with historic ties to Red Bull Racing. No proof, just breadcrumbs. Enough to keep the speculation alive and burning. Enough to make people ask, was this a one-time glitch? Or the surface crack of something deeper, something systemic? The next Grand Prix loomed just days away, but no one could talk about tire compounds, weather forecasts, or new aero packages. All eyes were now fixed on the FIA Mercedes, and the question that refused to die: who gave that order, and why? Because for the first time in years, Lewis Hamilton wasn't just fighting for podiums. He was fighting for the truth. And that made him more dangerous than ever. As Lewis Hamilton roared through the final sector, chasing every tenth of a second, the tension in the cockpit was razor-sharp. With the pit window open and tire degradation creeping in, he expected calm, surgical instructions from his race engineer. But what he got was something entirely different. A voice crackled through his radio, cutting in with unusual urgency. "Box now. Push hard. Go full attack until the line." There was no lead-up, no confirmation, no telltale cadence of Bono's familiar tone. Yet the command came with such precision, such confidence, that Hamilton didn't hesitate. He shifted down, braked late, and charged toward the pit lane entry with total commitment. The adrenaline masked any hint of doubt. The words didn't feel right, but in the chaos of the race, instincts took over. He obeyed. It wasn't until moments later, as the penalty warning appeared on the screen and the team scrambled to understand why, that reality struck. The message hadn't come from Mercedes. The voice was close, almost perfect, but ultimately foreign. The frequency used had been spoofed. It was an intrusion. A phantom transmission. Someone had hijacked the channel, timed it to perfection, and delivered just the right phrase to exploit Hamilton's trust. The speed trap showed 83.4 kilometers per hour, just over the limit. A minor infraction with massive consequences. 5 places gone. A podium vanished. A championship swing. Hamilton, livid and pacing in the post-race debrief room, demanded an explanation. His tone was volcanic. That wasn't Bono. That was someone else. You don't fool me with urgency and panic unless you want me to screw up. That was deliberate. It was surgical. That was sabotage. His eyes scanned the faces of the engineers, expecting one of them to confirm it had all been a misunderstanding. But what he saw was silence. Wide eyes. Pale expressions. Everyone knew something was wrong, deeply wrong. Mercedes moved fast. The team pulled full telemetry from the car, compared every radio packet from the last 10 laps, and called in external encryption specialists. What they found deep in the comms logs was chilling. At the precise moment Hamilton received the rogue message, another signal, subtly masked and bouncing off a nearby relay tower, had injected itself into the system. The origin was unknown. The modulation was sophisticated, likely pre-recorded, and perfectly timed with Leclerc's pit stop. It wasn't just a random prank. It was methodical. Professional. The infiltrator had studied Mercedes' radio cadence, copied Bono's inflection patterns, and chosen the one moment when Hamilton would act without thinking. Simultaneously, in the Ferrari garage, the mood had gone from relief to crisis. Charles Leclerc had just wrapped up a cautious scripted media session when Frédéric Vasseur pulled him aside, whispering urgently. What started as a quiet discussion quickly escalated. Leclerc's voice rose. Journalists nearby caught snippets, enough to stitch together the mood: accusatory, defensive, chaotic. You told me he'd box after me, not during. This wasn't the plan. You said it would be clean. Vasseur's face was drained of color. Charles, I swear, we didn't authorize any of this. Someone's gone rogue. If this is connected to us, we'll find out. But I did not approve it. Leclerc's frustration boiled over. His hands gestured wildly. His body language screamed distrust. Don't insult me, he snapped. A fake message gets sent during my stop, and you think that's a coincidence? That someone just happened to pick my window? They used me. Or you did. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, there was silence. Ferrari personnel watched from a distance, stunned. The mechanics shifted uncomfortably, trying to look busy. The press lingered, feeding on tension like vultures circling fresh meat. It didn't take long for rumors to spill out into the paddock. Back at Mercedes, Toto Wolff was in damage control mode. He called an emergency meeting with the FIA and race stewards. "This is bigger than a penalty," he said with quiet intensity. "This is breach of trust. Breach of security. You let someone inject comms mid-race. What's next? Interfering with brake bias? ERS settings? This isn't racing anymore. This is warfare." The FIA promised a full investigation, but doubts lingered. There were whispers of prior attempts, subtle comms dropouts in prior races, unexplained static during strategic calls. Had this been building for months? Had someone been probing the system, waiting for the perfect moment? In the Red Bull garage, Christian Horner leaned back with his arms crossed, watching the chaos unfold on the monitors. "I told them," he muttered to Helmut Marko. "You let these encryption systems lapse, you get punished. We upgraded ours in Bahrain. They didn't." Marko simply nodded, his gaze fixed on the screen. And now Ferrari's caught in the middle. Horner smirked. Or they're not. As investigations ramped up, teams grew paranoid. Radio protocols were revised overnight. Engineers triple-checked frequencies. Codename systems were discussed. Drivers were briefed to question every message, every tone, every syllable. The trust that had existed for decades between driver and engineer had been shattered in a single moment. In the days that followed, pundits and analysts tore the event apart. Some blamed Mercedes for weak encryption. Others suggested foul play by a rival team. Still others floated darker theories, third-party interference, possibly from a disgruntled ex-employee or even external tech operatives hired to manipulate outcomes. The FIA announced that all team radios would now be subject to real-time monitoring by an independent encryption body. But the damage was already done. A line had been crossed. Hamilton, speaking to select reporters in a closed-door session, was raw. "I trusted that voice. That's the worst part. I didn't even question it. That's how good they were. That's how deep this goes. If you can make a driver obey without thinking, you've got control. And if they can control us, they can control the race." No one could answer him. Because deep down, everyone knew he was right. Toto Wolff moved like a man who had prepared for this exact moment. Not a second was wasted. The instant the FIA announced the controversial penalty, within less than half an hour, Wolff had already summoned a private session. Closed doors, no press, no recordings, between himself, Frederick Vasseur, and high-ranking FIA officials. What unfolded in that tense, airless room was not a polite exchange of differing viewpoints. It was a confrontation masquerading as diplomacy. Wolff arrived armed not just with data, but with a timeline broken down to the second, every radio communication meticulously transcribed, telemetry analyzed, messages decrypted. "We're not here because of a miscalculation," he told them, his voice steady but sharp enough to cut steel. "We're here because of a calculated move. This wasn't a system glitch. It was a precise strike at a precise time. And whether it came from Ferrari directly or through someone acting on your behalf, knowingly or not, we are prepared to escalate this to the highest level, both legally and within the governing bodies." Vasseur, usually confident and measured, sat with his hands clasped tightly, knuckles whitening. He wasn't defensive, but he was clearly caught off guard by the intensity and sheer preparedness Wolff had brought to the table. "You think I ordered this?" he asked, but there was no indignation in his voice, only a dawning realization that the situation had spiraled far beyond a racing incident. "If someone within my organization violated the principles of fair competition, I promise you, they won't survive the fallout. I'm not interested in winning at the cost of my integrity." But behind the politics, the posturing and the press releases, the fire was burning hotter elsewhere. Lewis Hamilton was on another level of fury, a calm, controlled, focused rage that simmered beneath the surface. He didn't storm into the media pen. He walked. Slowly. Deliberately. Like a soldier returning from battle with unfinished business. The questions came fast, about the penalty, about the alleged message manipulation, about Ferrari. And though his responses were delivered with his trademark composure, there was no mistaking the cold fire in his eyes. "You fight for everything out there," Hamilton said, his jaw clenched just enough to show he was holding back more than words. Every breaking point, every apex, every lap is a war. You prepare for weeks. You live inside the simulator. You drill strategies. You suffer through heat, pressure, stress, doubt, all of it. And then someone off track decides your race outcome with a falsified message? That's not motorsport. That's sabotage. And if that's what the sport is becoming, then someone needs to be held accountable now. When a journalist asked him directly whether he believed Ferrari had orchestrated the incident, Hamilton didn't blink. He didn't look away. He didn't even pause. I don't care what badge they wear or what color their car is. What matters is motive, opportunity, and benefit. They had all three. That's enough to demand answers. That's enough to demand truth. Back in the paddock, the tension was so thick it choked the air. Staffers whispered in corridors. Engineers reviewed communications in near silence. FIA representatives refused to make statements. Ferrari mechanics avoided eye contact with Mercedes personnel. The entire grid felt like a powder keg, and Toto Wolff was walking around with a lit match. His team had already begun preparing a formal protest. Lawyers were being consulted. PR teams were scrambling to manage what was quickly becoming the biggest off-track scandal of the season. Insiders say Mercedes had traced the manipulated message to a timing window where data logs showed unusual spikes, seconds before the controversial decision. It wasn't just a suggestion anymore, it was a growing case. And even though Ferrari continued to deny any involvement, there were hushed conversations within their garage that something had gone terribly wrong, possibly without Vasseur's knowledge. The possibility of a rogue element acting on their own initiative had been raised, a technical staff member with high-level access but low-level supervision. Meanwhile, Hamilton's silence after that first statement was telling. He didn't post. He didn't tweet. He didn't share cryptic Instagram stories. He went dark, the kind of silence that precedes an explosion. Rumors swirled that he'd held a private meeting with Wolff, not just as a driver, but as a partner, a stakeholder in Mercedes' future, demanding they go all the way, no matter who got burned. If they crossed a line, he allegedly told Wolff, you draw one they can't come back from. Throughout the night, Mercedes engineers ran simulations not to improve the car, but to reverse engineer the decision chain that had led to the manipulation. The deeper they dug, the more disturbing it became. A specific signal reroute, untraceable through normal telemetry, hidden behind what appeared to be a standard redundancy protocol, had been triggered milliseconds before Hamilton's race strategy shifted under false pretenses. It was surgical. It was professional. And it was unmistakably intentional. By morning, Mercedes had drafted a 57-page report. Every page, every diagram, every timestamp was a bullet in what Wolff was now calling the war for the soul of Formula One. And war, it seemed, was exactly what he was preparing for. Ferrari, on the other hand, faced their own crisis. Vasseur's internal meeting was brutal. Voices were raised. Accusations flew. Senior personnel were grilled on access control, encryption protocols, interdepartmental communication. The notion that someone from within might have committed digital espionage to manipulate a race result was no longer dismissed as paranoia. It was being treated as plausible, and possibly even likely. Hamilton, later seen leaving the track in silence, had one final interaction with a team member before disappearing into the night. They'll try to spin it, minimize it, distract from it, he said. But the truth? The truth always survives. And this time, I'm not letting it get buried. Formula One was no longer just a championship. It had become a battlefield of truth versus manipulation, integrity versus advantage, and for the first time in years, the drama off the track threatened to overshadow everything happening on it. The fans sensed it. The drivers felt it. And the leadership on both sides, Mercedes and Ferrari, knew it. Whatever came next would either cleanse the sport or corrupt it forever. The FIA's sudden and aggressive escalation of this investigation has taken the entire paddock by storm, reaching a depth and intensity that hasn't been witnessed since the explosive Spygate incident that shook the foundation of Formula One nearly 2 decades ago. In an unprecedented move, the governing body has demanded that every single team hand over their complete race communication data, stretching not only to team radio transmissions but also to internal messages between engineers, pit wall strategy meetings, encrypted texts, and even backup archives that were previously thought to be irrelevant. The scrutiny has become so invasive that cybersecurity experts have been deployed to analyze and penetrate the layers of military-grade encryption used by teams to protect their proprietary data. Every communication frequency used during the Barcelona Grand Prix weekend is being dissected, triangulated, and compared in a forensic-level audit that some insiders describe as paranoia-turned-protocol. What began as a whisper of suspicion has now spiraled into a firestorm that threatens to consume reputations, rewrite race results, and stain legacies. If any manipulation, tampering, or unauthorized interception of communications is confirmed, the ramifications will be seismic. We're not merely talking about fines or reprimands. This is the kind of controversy that could see race wins revoked, constructors stripped of points, technical staff suspended indefinitely, and potentially even drivers themselves disqualified retroactively. There are already whispers in the paddock that some FIA officials are pushing for zero-tolerance measures that would include multi-race bans and the reallocation of championship points. The paddock has descended into an atmosphere of paranoia and mistrust. Every glance across the garage feels like a veiled accusation. Every nod, every crossed-arm posture during press conferences, every seemingly casual comment is being dissected and reinterpreted under a dark, suspicious lens. Within team headquarters, internal investigations have been launched simultaneously. Mercedes, Red Bull, Ferrari, and Aston Martin have each confirmed that they've begun reviewing their own logs, not just to defend themselves but to see if perhaps they too were victims of some deeper, more insidious foul play. It's no longer about whether there was interference. It's now about who did it, how they did it, and who stood to gain the most. And within that tangled web of motives and suspicions lies the one race that should have been a celebration of performance and progress, Barcelona. For Lewis Hamilton, this weekend was supposed to mark a resurgence. Everything pointed toward a resurgence. The updates on the car had delivered on Friday, free practice times had been encouraging, and Saturday's qualifying effort brought genuine optimism to the Mercedes garage. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Hamilton had a machine that could bite back at the front runners. The media narrative was already being written, the king is back. And then, as Sunday unfolded, everything cracked. Pit stop confusion, inexplicable strategy changes, apparent telemetry blackouts, and most damning of all, a strange and sudden drop in performance during the critical stint where he was supposed to challenge for the podium. The timing of these anomalies couldn't have been worse. The technical mishap theory doesn't fully satisfy anyone anymore. Not the fans. Not the media. And certainly not the engineers whose night shifts now revolve around proving that their own systems weren't compromised. Some fans cling to the belief that this was a random technical failure, a rare but possible glitch in the labyrinth of digital systems that govern every facet of a modern F1 car. But the volume of inconsistencies is too high, the pattern too convenient. Others are convinced it was a calculated act of sabotage, whether internal, external, or even inter-team. Online platforms have turned into battlegrounds. Hashtags are exploding. Conspiracy theories range from rogue engineers being planted in rival garages to the FIA using Hamilton as a pawn in a greater political struggle within the sport. Some say the investigation is part of a wider attempt to level the playing field before the regulation changes of 2026. Others believe it's payback, either from rivals threatened by Hamilton's resurgence or from old enemies who never forgot the power he wields, both on and off the track. Meanwhile, the emotional toll on drivers, team principals, and key personnel is beginning to show. Toto Wolff has appeared visibly tense in recent interviews, his carefully chosen words masking a growing frustration that borders on fury. Christian Horner, never one to avoid a strategic jab, has suggested that teams should focus more on performance than paranoia, a statement that only added more fuel to the firestorm. Even Ferrari's Fred Vasseur, usually a calm presence, has begun to speak in more clipped tones when asked about data transparency. But perhaps the most surreal aspect of this ongoing saga is the silence from the FIA itself. Apart from a brief and coldly worded statement confirming the investigation, no details have been shared. No timelines. No interim findings. Nothing to calm the storm. The silence is deafening, and it's only deepening the cracks in trust between the FIA and the teams. Some insiders speculate that the delay is strategic, that the governing body is preparing a sweeping announcement that could implicate multiple organizations and upend the competitive order of the current championship. Others fear the opposite, that the investigation has hit a dead end, and the FIA is simply buying time to control the damage. In the garages, engineers work longer hours under tighter security. Passwords are being changed daily. Access to strategic data is now limited to only a handful of trusted staff. Meanwhile, psychological tension is climbing. Drivers are being briefed differently, with some teams even changing the cadence and codes of their team radio commands mid-race to avoid any possibility of interception. It's as if the entire grid is operating under siege. What makes all of this even more intense is the timing. With the championship still wide open, every point matters. Every weekend becomes a chance to rise or fall. And now, with trust eroding rapidly, each Grand Prix feels like it could explode with another scandal at any moment. The pressure isn't just on the track anymore, it's in the briefings, in the data rooms, in every glance exchanged between rivals and teammates alike. No one knows where the next revelation will come from, and that uncertainty has transformed this season into something unlike anything seen in recent memory. And so, as the motorsport world holds its collective breath, the investigation continues behind closed doors. Rumors fly faster than the cars on the straights. The FIA digs deeper. Teams prepare for the worst. Fans argue, speculate, obsess. The sport itself, its essence, its integrity, its soul, is in a state of suspense. One revelation could tip the balance. One leak could collapse empires. One verdict could change the course of this championship and of Formula One history forever.